بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أما بعد. Today inshallah we're going to take a look at, in our series Elevating the Sisters, a biography of another great woman in Islam, a woman who many of us might have heard her name. However, sometimes we are not, or we might not be familiar with the details of her life, and that's none other than al-Darda as-Sughra. al-Darda. And we're going to begin inshallah first by describing who this is, and the difference between Darda, who is al-Kubra, the elder, and another Darda, al-Darda, referred to as the younger one, the younger. So inshallah we'll begin first with that. And this is an important point because sometimes there are more than one great figure with a similar name. And so inshallah we will begin by discussing difference between the two women. So first we should know that there is a sahabiyya, a female companion. Her name is al-Darda. al-Darda is the wife of Abu Darda, the famous companion and Sahabi. Both are Sahaba. But Abu Darda is known as one of those great companions who the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentioned virtues for. So there's two, the ulama say, two Dardas. One is referred to as al-Darda al-Kubra, the older Darda, or the senior, or the elder. And the second one is referred to as al-Darda as-Sughra, which is the younger. So the older and the younger. And so the older one is the one who was a sahabiyya and was the first wife of Abu Darda, Abu al-Darda. As for the second one, then she is a tabi'iyya. She is a female tabi'i, and she also is a wife of Abu Darda. Hence why they both have the same name. طيب. So let's begin first. Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah, who died 676 Hijri, he says, Al-Humaydi said at the end of his book Al-Jama' Bayn al-Sahihayn, that Abu Bakr al-Barqani said al-Darda as-Sughra, al-Darda, the minor or the senior, the younger, is the one who narrated the ahadith found in the Sahih. Means when you look in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim, when you see the name al-Darda, it's referring to al-Darda as-Sughra, the younger one. As for al-Darda al-Kubra, then she is a female companion, radiyallahu ta'ala anha, and she does not have any hadith in the two Sahihs. Rather, there is a biography of her in Tarikh al-Dimashq of Ibn Asakir, and he mentions in there that al-Darda al-Kubra was a female companion. Then he mentions her name. So we'll begin with this point. So we're upon clarity when we're talking about al-Darda. There's two of them. So the first one, al-Darda al-Kubra, the elder. Her name was Khayrah bint Abi Hadrad. Khayrah bint Abi Hadrad. And Abi Hadrad, his name was Salama bin Umair. Khayrah bint Abi Hadrad, and his name was Salama, like his kunya was Abu Hadrad, but his full name was Salama bin Umair. She was the sister of Abdullah bin Abi Hadrad. She came from the Aslami tribe, and her kunya, it was mentioned, was Muhammad, but as we see here, it was al-Darda. And she died in the lifetime of Abu al-Darda radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. That's the point that differentiates the two Dardas. al-Darda Kubra died in the lifetime of Abu al-Darda radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And all of this that I mentioned now was mentioned by Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah in his book Tahdhib al-Asma wal-Lughat, volume 3, page 257. Likewise, Hafid ibn Hajar rahimahullah, who died 852 Hijri, he says al-Darda as-Sughra is the younger one, was a tabi'iyah. She was a female tabi'i, and she is not the Kubra, the elder, who was the female companion. And this is found in Fathul Bari, volume 3, page 43. Now, with that being mentioned, that we differentiate between the two Dardas, Dardas, if you wish to find a biography of al-Darda, you can go back to the book Mukhtasar Tarikh al-Dimashq of Hafid Ibn Asakir, Imam Ibn Asakir, volume 8, page 103. And as a side benefit, even though that she does not have any ahadith in the Sahihain, she did narrate al-Darda Kubra ahadith in outside of Sahihain, for example in the Musnad and others. طيب, our focus today is on al-Darda as-Sughra, for she is the one who we have more biographical data about, and also she is the one who I want to highlight some of the benefits so we can learn from her. And this is obviously important because once we differentiate between the two, you will not confuse them, because sometimes people they read they read both and they don't know which is being referred to. So the second one, al-Darda as-Sughra, who is the focus of our subject today and our biography and benefits. Her name, according to Imam al-Zahabi rahimahullah in Sir A'nam al-Nubala, volume 4, page 278, he says her name was Hujaymah, with a ha, Hujaymah. And it was also said Juhaymah, with a jim. So Hujaymah, and it was also said Juhaymah. That's the difference in terms of what her first name is. Mostly you find Hujaymah with the ha. And her last name was Bint Huyay. Bint Huyay al-Wassabiyya al-Himyariyya al-Dimashqiyya. So she was from Greater Syria. So full name Hujaymah or Juhaymah bint Huyay al-Wassabiyya al-Himyariyya al-Dimashqiyya. Kunya was al-Darda as-Sughra, which is al-Darda, the younger one. Now she was from Greater Syria, and this is because Abu Darda radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, later in the time and the Khilafah of Umar bin Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he moved to Sham, the Greater Syria, to establish the madrasa for ulum al-Quran or darasa or the hifz of the Quran, etc. And so he resided there, and so later on you can find the description of her to that region as he lived there as well. Imam al-Dhahabi describes al-Darda as-Sughra, saying she was a leader, a sayyida, a noble lady. So a sayyida, like a noble woman, an alima, female scholar, and faqiha, and a jurist. And this is what I want to highlight in today's lesson, is the knowledge of al-Darda and her influence in terms of her knowledge, and as inspiration for the sisters in terms of seeking knowledge and aspiring to become like these great women. For alhamdulillah, there are many of the women who are knowledgeable, as we mentioned already, some of them in the past, like Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. But today, inshallah, we want to focus on another scholar, which many of us may not be familiar with. So Imam al-Zahabi rahimahullah, he says that she was an alima, a jurist, a scholar. And in terms of her biography, then he says that she grew up, when she was young, she grew up. It is mentioned at this point, but however, it seems to be more correct that there are some narrations that say that she grew up as an orphan in his household when she was younger. And other narrations suggest that she had parents. So, wallahu a'lam, if that part about the orphan is correct, because what it seems to be is that comes in a narration which is not authentic. What seems more authentic is that when she was younger, she presented, i.e. the entire Quran, she recited the entire Quran to Abu Darda radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And this is one of her virtues, that she was a hafidah, a memorizer of the Quran. And this is after, she's a tabi'in, she memorized the entire Quran, benefiting and learning from Abu Darda radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. As we said, Abu Darda, he sent Umar ibn Khattab sent Abu Darda to Sham to teach in the madrasa, to establish a madrasa Shamiyya for those who wish to memorize the Quran. So a lot of the asanid of the Quran returned back to Abu Darda. And know that Abu Darda radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was a hafiz himself. Imam al-Zahabi first says she recited the Quran upon Abu Darda and she was young. And she lived long and was known for her knowledge, action, and asceticism. She was a zahida. So this is a great benefit that we already start off with, that she was a memorizer of the Quran, and she studied the hands and tutelage of Abu Darda radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And she was known for her knowledge, acting upon the sunnah, and of course her fiqh and jurisprudence. And to prove this point, Abu Darda radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was one of those who memorized the Quran. Anas ibn Malik reports, مات النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ولم يجمع القرآن غير أربعة: أبو درداء ومعاذ بن جبل وزيد بن ثابت وأبو زيد قال ونحن ورثناه. Anas ibn Malik, may Allah be pleased with him, said, the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam died, and none had collected, i.e. memorized the entire Quran except for 4 persons, or 4 people: Abu Darda, Mu'adh bin Jabal, Zayd bin Thabit, and Abu Zayd. And we were the inheritors of Abu Zayd, as he had no offspring. This hadith Bukhari 5004. And someone may ask, does this mean that only 4 of the Sahaba memorized the Quran in the time of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam? And the answer is no. Rather, what Anas ibn Malik is doing here, he's not making hasr, he's not making restriction. However, he's highlighting those who are prominent amongst the memorizers. Like Mu'adh bin Jabal radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was the alim, a scholar of this ummah, the one who was knowledgeable of the halal and haram. He too was sent to Sham at the time of Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu to teach the people, after he was already sent first to Yemen by Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So it doesn't mean that only 4 memorized. For Umar memorized the Quran according to the correct opinion, and Abu Bakr Siddiq memorized the Quran according to the correct opinion, both in the lifetime of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And we know Uthman, and we know Ubay ibn Ka'b, ibn Mas'ud, etc., etc. And that's why the numbers that memorize the Quran are many. And if somebody goes back to the books of biographies, Tabaqat al-Qurra, of Imam al-Zahabi, for example, rahimahullah, or those books before, you'll find many names of those who memorized the Quran. Shahid, the benefit we take from this, Abu Darda was half of the Quran. He taught Darda the Quran. SubhanAllah. She memorized the Quran at a young age. There's a benefit then that the women can memorize, and it does have the same emphasis for the women to memorize and engage in the hifd al-Quran, just like it is for the men to engage in the hifd al-Quran. So we said that Imam Dhahabi says she recited the Quran upon Abu Darda and she was young. And she lived long and was known for her knowledge, action, and asceticism, zuhud. She was an ascetic, i.e. she was one who refrained from the dunya. And this is something which we find in her biography. So she memorized the Quran at a young age, and she learned from many, and from those that she benefited from as her teachers. Because the ulama, they mention that she benefited primarily from Abu al-Darda, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, but also she learned and narrated from Salman al-Farisi, Ka'b ibn Asim al-Ash'ari, Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha, Abu Hurairah, wa Ta'ifa, and a whole group of scholars. And also what's interesting as we see is that after Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha, it's not like the female scholarship ended there. As some people may think erroneously that only she was a scholar. There were many. And after her came many, and she probably was al-Darda, one of the most prominent. She was probably one of the most prominent of the female companions in knowledge. There are others too. Continuing, there is a narration that is mentioned that she used to learn the Quran in the masjid with the men when she was young. And later on, when she became older, she moved to the Sufuf al-Nisa, to the ranks of the women. This narration, I'm going to recite it or read it now. It's actually not an authentic narration, but it's often cited. So for example, Imam al-Zahabi rahimahullah in Sir A'lam al-Nubala, he says, قال ابن جابر وعثمان ابن أبي عاتكة كانت الدرداء يتيمة في حجر أبي درداء تختلف معه في برنس تصلي في صفوف الرجال وتجلس في حلق القراء تعلم القرآن حتى قال لها أبو الدرداء يوما ألحقي بصفوف النساء. The narration says that Ibn Jabir and Uthman ibn Abi Atika narrate, al-Darda was an orphan under the guardianship of Abu al-Darda. And she used to come to the mosque with Abu al-Darda wearing what's called a burnus. A burnus is like a hooded thobe. So she would come and she would pray in the men's rows. And she used to sit in the circles of the teachers learning Quran until Abu Darda asked her one day to join the women's rows. Now this narration, it's cited, and sometimes you find this, or it's often popularized in the work of Akram al-Nadwi, as a contemporary I think this professor or teacher at Cambridge, in the book that people read called Al-Muhaddithat, the Women Scholars in Islam, page 81. This book, Al-Muhaddithat, it's a book this author wrote where he compiles biographies of the female scholars of hadith. And what you notice is that in there he narrates that which is authentic and that which is not. And so it's not a book that is 100% authentic. It's rather a collection of whatever is reported. But because of this book, many people have come to this narration. He says on page 81, women attended the mosques as the men attended. It means the time of the Sahaba and the Salaf. Hind bint Usayd bin Ibn Hudayr al-Ansariya learnt Surah Qaf from hearing the Prophet ﷺ reciting it in the prayer. And then he narrates the next narration of al-Darda. Now the first part of this narration, the first benefit is correct. The hadith of Hind bint Usayd al-Ansariya, she learned Qaf wal Quran al-Majid from the tongue of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, kama fi Sahih Muslim. But as for this narration, Darda, is not correct. And we'll explain the weakness in it, but you find some people, they take this narration, and they extrapolate from it certain rulings that perhaps are cannot be extrapolated from it. And so, for example, you have some who say that it's permissible for a young girl to sit in the Quran classes of the men, as long as she's young, and when she gets older she has to go to the women's classes, or some things around that nature. Lakin, the reality is that this narration isn't sahih. It's reported by al-Bukhari in Tarikh al-Awsat. Bukhari, he narrates it in his history, the middle history. And he brings the chain of transmission. It's hadith number 17 or 716. And here, he says, when he brings the chain, up until Uthman ibn Abi Atika, some of the scholars weakened him as a narrator, but others they didn't. However, it's not clear that he narrated from al-Darda as-Sughra. So Uthman ibn Atika, either he's da'if, according to some of the muhaddithun have weakened him as a narrator. And even if he was, for those who say that he is trustworthy, then we don't have proof that he narrated from Darda. As for Ibn Jabir, is Abdul Rahman bin Yazid Ibn Jabir, he's a narrator who is reliable. However, he did not hear directly from Darda. Rather, if you go to the Kitab Tarikh al-Dimashq Ibn Asakir, we find that he used to narrate on behalf of the Mawla, the free servant of Darda. His name is Khulayd bin Sa'ad as-Salamani. As-Salamani. And this narrator is weak according to Hafid ibn Hajar and others. You can see Lisan Mizan Ibn Hajar or Mizan I'tidal al-Dhahabi and others. So what seems to be is the chain is not established or has weakness, and it'd be difficult to extract from these kind of things. And the reason why I'm highlighting this is that unfortunately in the biography of Darda, as I was preparing it, I found a lot of strange things being mentioned. And we'll come to that later, some of the strange things, other things that I mentioned. And the reason why we're doing this is because we need to purify our sources. Number one, it's not correct to narrate from our Salaf that which is not authentic from them. And number two, we cannot use as evidence that which is not established, or that which has been extrapolated, or that which has been at times even stretched or mistranslated at times to make a point. And so this narration, due to this, we cannot extrapolate certain things, encouraging, for example, the women, young girls to study the halaqat of the boys and etc. Rather, the women have their halaqat with the female teachers, and then the men for theirs. And this is the best of ways. Going forward, Darda radiyallahu ta'ala rahimahullah was one who was known for her knowledge. She was known for her knowledge, and she was known for her strength in fiqh. As we said, Imam Zahabi said she used to act upon the knowledge, and she used to have it, and she learned knowledge from Abu Darda. And this is a benefit that later, when Darda Kubra passed away, Abu Darda married Darda as-Sughra. And so then she benefited most of her knowledge and hadith from Abu Darda. And that's a benefit of the relationship between the husband and the wife for ilm. That the husband, he teaches his wife, but his wife and her husband, both of them learn. And that's why you find some of the scholars, they mention in their books that the responsibility of the husband to teach the wife. If you go to some of the books, we find the ulama, they mention this. For example, Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin Ibn Qudama, he mentions in the chapter in relation to marriage that the responsibility of the husband to learn his deen so he can pass it to his wife and teach her. Or he is mas'ul, he is the one who is in charge of the house. And so we see a beautiful example in Abu Darda and Darda. Abu Darda being older, being a sahabi, after he married her, Darda as-Sughra, he taught her. And subhanAllah, benefited her. And the example before that we know, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when he taught Aisha, radiallahu ta'ala anha, or Hafsa also, for Hafsa also memorized the Quran, radiallahu ta'ala anha. So this is such an important thing that the husband and wife make ta'awun fil khair. They participate and they cooperate in khair. وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَتَقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. Allah says, cooperate with one another in good and piety, and don't cooperate in sin and transgression. So it's a great motivation for husband and wife learning and benefiting and imparting of knowledge, especially in the era we live in today, where knowledge is not given its due, but rather we see then the true benefit and true kind of connection that can be developed between husband and wife is in the studying and the learning of the sacred knowledge. For there's nothing greater than that. Darda radiallahu ta'ala anha was so knowledgeable that the ulama, they would mention her from the senior tabi'een when it comes to ilm. Those who used to pass fatwa, and those people would benefit from her. For example, Ibn Hazm rahimahullah, he mentions in his book Ashab al-Futya min as-Sahabati wa Tabi'een, the people who passed fatwa from the Tabi'een and the companions. May Allah please with both of them. He says number 369, al-Darda. She was a mufti. She was one who passed the fatwas, and people used to take from her fatwa her knowledge. We know fatwa is not limited only for the men. Rather, the men and the women can pass fatwa, because when they have knowledge, just like we mentioned the biography of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. So this is how knowledge of Darda was, that she was at this level in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed her with knowledge to that extent that she was from those who passed the fatwa. She passed the fatwa, and she narrated the ahadith, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, as you mentioned, primarily by way of her husband, Abu Darda. And her narrations were considered reliable and trustworthy. And this is something which the ulama, they mention. Some people, they might not be familiar with this. But when it comes to narrators of hadith, we know that there's narrators of hadith that are male and those which are female. And the ulama, they mention the narrators of hadith and the women, is that the women narrators were much more trustworthy than, in general, than the male narrators. As Imam Dhahabi rahimahullah, and after him, Imam Hafid ibn Hajar mentioned, in general, we won't find weak narrators amongst the women, although there were many weak narrators amongst the men. So she was from those great narrators, rahimahullah. And what's interesting about her is her fiqh. And this is what I want to highlight as well, is that she was one who had fiqh. Fiqh means understanding of the deen. And what we take from this is that she benefited the community, the ummah, with her knowledge and her fiqh. And this is what many people today are in need of. In fact, our society is in dire need of female scholars, female students of knowledge, to teach their fellow sisters. So if we look at the biography of Darda, we find that, subhanAllah, she had a lot of fiqh. And to show this, to highlight some of her fiqh, because she has a lot of different opinions and stuff she narrated, is what Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah mentions in his Sahih. And the narration here mentioned by Imam Bukhari is mentioned in mu'allaq form, or afwan, it's not mentioned in his Sahih, it's mentioned in Tarikh al-Saghir, his smaller history book. He mentions, and this is mentioned by Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah, it's important, Shaykh al-Albani, he mentions this in Sifa as-Salatu al-Nabi, the Prophet's prayer described. And this is a book we continue to remind the brothers and sisters to benefit from, because this book is very beneficial. When you go there, you find the end of the book, the tail end of the book. After the Shaykh rahimahullah, he does all the effort in explaining how to pray properly and how not to pray, and all the things that people do, the mistakes, etc. He mentions the end point, how should a woman pray versus how the men should pray. We find some books of fiqh, they mention that women pray different than men. Women are supposed to pray different than men. And the question we need to ask ourselves, is that correct? Is that correct that women pray different than men? Or is that women pray the same as men? And the correct opinion is that women, they pray like men. There's no difference there. We don't have a proof that says that women pray different than men. And any of such narrations, either they come from some of the Sahaba, or they are not strong in their chains of transmission. But what we find authentically is that al-Darda, she used to pray like a man, i.e., the way Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam used to pray. Shaykh Albani says, rahimahullah, also al-Bukhari narrates in his Tariq al-Saghir, page 95, with the Sahih Sanad, that Darda, she used to sit in her prayer just as a man sits, and she was a woman of understanding. Allahu Akbar. That a woman, or she used to sit in her prayer just as a man sits, and she was a woman of understanding. Isnad Sahih, he says. And Shaykh brings other narrations to prove this point. And so what we take from this is that the woman, she should pray like a man. There is no proof that she should pray differently. And what we take from that narration is she used to pray like a man because she had fiqh. And this is why Rasulullah said in general, Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. Pray as you've seen me praying. Who is he referring to here, alayhi salatu salam? Men and women. Men and women. And Hafiz ibn Hajar, rahimahullah, he brings this discussion as well in Fath al-Bari about the way to sit. And he mentions this point, as Bukhari rahimahullah mentions also, that the intent of sitting in the prayer should be done the way the Rasul used to. And he says, وَأَنَّ ذَلِكَ كُلُّهُ السُّنَّةِ, all of that is sunnah, وَأَنْ لَا فَرْقَ بَيْنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَأَنَّ ذَا عِلْمِ يَحْتَجُ بِعِلْمِهِ. We take a benefit from all of this. And the benefit we're taking from this is that, number one, the sunnah is this, to pray the way that Rasulullah taught us. And number two, there's no difference between men and women when it comes to the prayer. And the last part, which is that the person of knowledge, we take from their knowledge. And because she was a faqih, we see this. And this is their encouragement for the sisters to stick to the sunnah of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Except when we have proofs to show that there's sometimes differentiation between the men and the women. Because in that case, we follow the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam. But in this case, women pray like men. And this is a strong proof from who? al-Darda, as-Sughra. Also, they mentioned in her biography, rahimahullah, that she used to benefit the people and teach them. And there is a narration that mentions that when Abu Darda was dying, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, that she said the following words to him. And this is mentioned in Tariq al-Dimashq of Ibn Asakir. Now it's mentioned that when Abu Darda was passing away, Darda said, "O Abu Darda, you proposed to me, or you proposed to my parents, and in the dunya, and they married me to you. And now I propose to you that you marry me, or we stay married in the akhirah." So he then said, Abu Darda, if this is the case, then do not marry anyone after me. Do not marry another man after me. Subhanallah. What is the intent of this narration? Now this narration itself, this qissa, there's actually a hadith to establish it. Shaykh al-Bari says in Silsila Ahadith al-Sahihah that the narration is reported from Abu Darda. The Darda reports from Abu Darda, al-mar'atu li akhiri azwajiha, that a woman in paradise will be with her last of her husbands if she was to remarry, means after his death. So for those reasons, this narration comes. Now if this narration itself, that they had this conversation, is backed by this proof. And that's the reason why when Muawiyah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu came, after the death of Abu Darda, Muawiyah proposed to Darda. He proposed to her, and she rejected him. Now, why did she reject him? It's not because of his status or anything else, for he was also a great Sahabi who has great status and knowledge. He's an alim as well, scholar. Rather because of this. She wanted to be with Abu Darda. She wanted to be with Abu Darda radiyallahu ta'ala anhu in the akhirah. And that's a benefit the ulama, they take that. Based on this hadith, a woman will be with the last of her husbands if she be married more than once in the akhirah. Not that she'll have both husbands. For this is not something which Islam permitted. Sharika or ishtirak, sharing a wife sharing more than one husband at one time, it's not from the Sharia Muhammadiyah. So the benefit we take from this is that. And this shows you again her zuhad. So she remained the rest of her life upon the ilm and ibadah, away from anyone. Some narrations say that when Muawiyah came to propose to her, she told him to fast. Because she's not going to get married again. Darda continued in knowledge and benefiting people until she passed. And she remained prominent in teaching and benefiting up until the life or the khilafah of Abdul Malik bin Marwan, rahimahullah. Now, I want to highlight this point before we finish, that there are some narrations that you find, subhanAllah, that give very weird or very strange assumptions. And I'll mention one of them. If you go to in the English biography, in the biography of Darda as-Sughra and Wikipedia, Allah musta'an, I was reading this, and I was surprised by the translation that was provided for one of the narrations there. And it didn't, number one, it was not accurate, and number two, it gave a wrong impression. It says there in Wikipedia in English, she used to pass verdicts, etc. And then it says Imam Ahmad related in his Musnad from Zayd ibn Aslam that he said Abdul Malik used to send an invitation to Darda, and she would spend the night at his guest, and he would ask her questions about the Prophet ﷺ. And he said, he arose one night and called his maid servant, but she came slowly, and he cursed her. So she said, do not curse, for indeed Abu Darda narrated to me that I heard the Messenger ﷺ saying, those who curse will not be witnesses or intercessors on the day of judgment. Now this narration is reported in Musnad Imam Ahmad, but the problem is that the translation itself insinuates something else. If you go to the translation, it says Abdul Malik used to send an invitation to Darda to spend the night as his guest. And this is strange, for when Darda, Abdul Malik Marwan, is married. And it's not allowed for him to spend the night with a strange woman. So what's intended by this? And this is what I found strange. SubhanAllah, what's this hadith or his translation insinuating? So when we go back to the origin, we find that the origin is slightly different than the correct wording that is intended. Is different than what is mentioned in the actual narration. And so inshallah we'll read the narration. In the Musnad Ahmad, it's mentioned authentically. Afwan, I pulled the hadith out here. 1 second. Just 1 minute. I'm just going to pull the hadith here to mention this point, because this is something which I found in during the research, and it was a wrong translation. So the translation, hadith number 27,569, and the Muhaqqiq Shu'ayb al-Noud says isnaduhu sahih rijal thiqat rijal shaykhain. It's authentic narration. It says Zayd bin Aslam says كان عبد الملك بن مروان يرسل إلى درداء فتبيت عند نسائه ويسألها عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. That's the correct wording. That Darda, the Malik bin Marwan, used to send an invitation for Darda to stay overnight with his wives. So she's going to spend the time with the women, and through his wives he would ask her questions about the deen. And one day when she was getting up At night, she heard Abdul Malik curse one of the servants for delaying in providing something, and then she told him the hadith, al-la'inin, those who curse Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who curse the people will not be لا يكونون يوم القيامة الشهداء ولا الشفعاء. So she mentioned, I heard Abu Darda narrate the following, and she mentioned the hadith. And so the benefit which I want to mention is that translation of Wikipedia is incorrect, so let the person be aware, and perhaps someone sometime will be edited, someone should edit this, and the other things like this that are narrated. In the la'anina لا يكونون الشفعاء ولا الشهداء, it's also in Muslim. طيب, inshallah. And Darda rahimahullah, she passed away in the state of knowledge and bara and benefit, and many people narrated from her, and she continued her ibadat, her night prayer, her establishing the sunnah, all the way until she passed. It's also mentioned that she made hajj in the year 81 Hijri. May Allah have mercy upon her. And so we benefit many things from her life. For the sisters, especially in today's time, we look for role models. We find a great scholar, an abida, one upon the sunnah, one who would teach the people, hafid al-kitabillah, and we'll also see an ascetic, one who gave up the dunya and focused her attention on teaching her fellow Muslims the knowledge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed her with. So in the example of Darda and Abu Darda is a great example of a husband and wife spending their life in the worship of Allah and the benefit of knowledge. And it's encouraging all of us to strive to be like these great women and men who, when we read their biographies, they really give us a perspective, a breath of fresh air, and encouragement and increase in wanting to elevate our own selves, especially in today's time when we see ourselves perhaps in light of what we see around us. We may think to ourselves that things are getting worse and worse, or people are lowering the standard. But when we read the Sahaba and the Salaf, we immediately realize how much shortcomings we have and how much we need to work on ourselves, and it gives us the motivation to work harder and to attend the lessons with more enthusiasm and to be reminded of these great examples. And every time you hear about them, we should think to ourselves how we can be like them. Be like these people who Allah blessed. أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ هَدَى اللَّهُ فَبِهُدَاهُمْ مُقْتَدِي. These are the people Allah guided, so from their guidance take as role models. Inshallah, if anyone has any questions, we'll take inshallah ta'ala. Question says, can you please clarify what is said in the Sunnah in regards to the topic of women going to the masjid, since in some cultures they say women should pray at home? So Islam, it's permissible for women to go to the masajid. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam clearly told us not to prohibit the women from that. And so the idea is that women are allowed to go to the masjid. And so the difference between praying continuously in the masjid versus praying at home, there's a khilaf. Not a khilaf in terms of the reward. No doubt praying at home is better for the women. The issue is, what is the role of women in the masjid? So Rasulullah first established the point, لا تمنعوا إماء الله مساجد الله. Don't prohibit the female servants of Allah from the masajid. But he said in another hadith, وَبُيُوتُهُنَّ خَيْرٌ لَهُنْ. Their houses are better for them. So women praying in the masjid at time to time, it's something good. But for her to pray in her house mostly is more rewarding. And that's why we find that the Sahabiya who loved to pray with Rasulullah in the masjid, Masjid Nabawi, with all of his sharaf and ajr, Rasulullah still encouraged her to pray at home because it's better for her and closer to her in terms of her khushu' and drawing near to Allah. Now, does that negate that she cannot come to the masjid? No. And what about the halaqat and durus? No. In fact, she should attend the masjid when she's able to benefit from the durus and the ilm. And the same as the sahabiyat used to come to Jum'ah for those same reasons. As we mentioned, the sahabiyah, she memorized the whole Surah Qaf from Rasulullah Jum'ah khutbah listening. So the masajid, there is a middle ground for the women, is that it's no prohibition. But is the encouragement to be there all the time? Means that they never stay in their homes? No. The homes are better for them. That should not be understood to be that they cannot attend. As some in the madhahib, I would say not madhabs, are actually called some of the cultures. They prohibit the women from the masjid. And that's wrong. They say there's no space for them, there is nothing. No. Islam says, لا تمنعوا إماء الله مساجد الله. Don't prohibit the female service in the masajid. And when there's programs going for them to learn, they should benefit and then go home. In the same way that women going to the masjid to benefit and learn, it should be something that she should be involved in, because the masajid are the best of the biqa'. However, it shouldn't be also the case that we find that some sisters, they're always in the masajid, they never go home, i.e. that they make the masajid their homes. And the problem with this is that if you're not going to pray at home to get the extra reward, you're missing also that benefit. So we find that praying at home for the women is more rewarding, so you should balance between the two. So the best middle course, the best affairs, خير الأمور أوسطها, is to take a middle course, to attend the Jum'ah from time to time, the halaqat, attend them, benefit from them. The women have a space in the masjid. But at the same time, the women should also not be one who misses the greater of things, which is to pray in our homes. And this is why we find that the Sahabiyat, they were balanced. They were come for Salat al-Fajr even. But that didn't negate the fact that Rasulullah also said وَبُيُوتُهُنَّ خَيْرٌ لَهُنْ, that they didn't used to not pray at home. They used to also pray at home. So we encourage the sisters to have that middle course. And those cultures where they say the women shouldn't go at all, this is a misunderstanding, in the sense that they think that the masajid is off limits period for the women. And that's the reason why it actually leads a lot often to women not learning their deen, not having places where they can study, not go to any halaqat or any mawa'id. And this is one of the dangers that we have, that staying home is very good for the woman, but does it mean then at what expense? So we find the women always at home, but they're not learning. And they say don't go to the masjid or don't benefit from the masjid, and then there's nothing happening. In fact, maybe at times you find that this is one of the things, especially in cultures that we live in here, where we don't have a lot of infrastructures and support for the sisters. So the balanced course in the deen is this way, and it's an encouragement to teach our fellow brothers and sisters, family members, the correct stance in Islam, the sunnah for the women to attend the masjid, but at the same time ensuring they're praying at home and combining between both. The masajid is still there for them. And this is something which it should not be the case where they tell them they cannot come. طيب, the questioner says, can you mention the reference about the narration regarding Abdul Malik Umar inviting her to spend the night with his wife so they can learn? Hadith is in Musnad Imam Ahmed, hadith number 27,569. And this narration, it's an authentic narration. And this is the correct wording, is that he would invite her to spend the night with his wives and his female folk, and through them he would ask. The questioner says, if the woman remarries in the dunya due to a need, can she choose between the two in the akhirah, or she is restricted to be for the latter husband? And this kind of question, wallahu a'lam, it requires to look further into it. So we will, inshallah, we will research into it and get back to the questioner on that one. If no other questions, inshallah, we'll end with this much, since I believe it's time for the Maghrib. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to benefit us from that which we heard and that which we benefit. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.